Shauna spent her entire childhood in an orphanage. All she knew about her parents was that they were unfit and had their parental rights revoked for good reasons. Deborah, the orphanage director, told her this whenever the little girl asked about them. But this answer never satisfied Shauna. She needed more details. What if her parents had reformed long ago? Or what if Shauna had been taken away from her mother by mistake, and her mother was looking for her? When you grow up, you can decide for yourself whether you want to know the truth or not, Deborah would evade. After these words, Deborah would always leave, signaling the end of the conversation. Shauna would calm down for a while, but the hope that her mother would remember her and come for her remained. When Shauna turned 10, she began to believe that her father might find her one day. Maybe he wouldn't even be her biological father. She often had the same dream. A tall, strong man with kind blue eyes would walk into the room full of children. He wouldn't notice anyone except Shauna. He would kneel beside her, take her hand, and say, "Hello, my daughter. I finally found you." But reality was very different. The people who visited the orphanage often didn't notice little Shauna. When Shauna turned 18 and it was time for her to leave the orphanage, she no longer wanted to know anything about her parents. All she dreamed of was having a family of her own. She decided that it was better to remain ignorant about her relatives than to be constantly disappointed in them. The only person who truly cared about Shauna's future was her caretaker, Lainey. Over the years, Lainey had become a friend to Shauna. "I can't believe how grown up you are now, my girl," Lainey would sigh. "Remember, dear, if you ever need any help, you know where to find me. Why don't you stay with me for a while?" "Don't worry, Lainey, I'll manage. I'm an adult now," Shauna would respond. Shauna didn't want to accept help from anyone. She had long dreamed of being free and independent. However, as it turned out, the independent life she had dreamed of was much harder in reality. Shauna realized she didn't know how to do anything. She started to panic. On one hand, everything was as she had wanted, no one told her what to do or when to do it. But on the other hand, she couldn't handle the difficulties that arose. Thankfully, Lainey helped her. She found Shauna a job at a factory canteen where the workers were provided with housing. Barely settling into her new place, Shauna wondered how she would live from then on. It was hard being completely alone, without relatives or friends. Shauna didn't get along with her colleagues. She trusted no one and was especially afraid of men, convinced she would never marry. After just 2 months of living independently, Shauna felt more alone than ever. One gloomy autumn evening, she gathered her things and left her room. 40 minutes later, she stood before a tall wooden fence, hesitating to ring the doorbell. Finally, with a trembling hand, she pressed the button. "Who's there?" came a familiar voice. "Lainey, it's me, Shauna," she said, trying to hold back tears. When the door opened, Shauna was on the verge of crying. At last, she saw someone who needed her. "Shauna, what happened?" "I couldn't reach you for 2 days," exclaimed Lainey. "I lost my phone." "No worries, we'll get you a new one. Come inside." "Stop crying, you're freezing." Shauna entered the house, smiling through her tears and sniffling like a child. Inside, it was warm and cozy, and Shauna suddenly felt so much better. She felt protected. Lainey was already bustling around the stove, quickly brewing tea and setting a meat pie on the table. "How's work?" she asked, concerned. "Are you upset because of the phone?" "Don't worry, we'll get a new one tomorrow." "Is there a problem with your neighbors?" "No, work is fine, and there are no problems with the neighbors," Shauna replied. "Then what's the matter?" "I don't understand," Lainey said. "I feel terrible," Shauna whispered, struggling to hold back the tears again. "I don't know what to do next. I can't make friends with anyone. I can't start a relationship with men. They seem to notice me, but I'm afraid of them. How can you trust a stranger?" Lainey sighed heavily. She understood Shauna's state perfectly. She knew that adjusting to life after the orphanage was very difficult. Deep down, she believed Shauna would cope, but hearing her words made Lainey very worried. "Shauna, listen to me, please," Lainey said. "I understand your desire to become independent quickly. But you see, it's not working out. So, I suggest you live with me for a while. You'll brighten up my loneliness and gain some experience in managing a household. I never told you this, but I want you to know. If anything happens to you, I could never forgive myself. Live here." Shauna looked at her in confusion. "Yes, what's bothering you?" "It's just for a while, until you learn everything. Or until you get tired of me. I may be a grump, but admit it, it's more fun together." Shauna hesitated. On one hand, she really wanted to stay, but on the other hand, she felt terribly uncomfortable. But after thinking it over and weighing all the pros and cons, she nodded in agreement. Little did she know how much this decision would cost her. Moving into Lainey's house, Shauna finally experienced what it was like to have a family. Lainey took care of her as best she could, teaching her some tricks that were essential for independent living. Time passed. One warm July evening, they were drinking tea together. The air was filled with the scent of flowers, and the two women, comfortably seated at a round wooden table, were chatting. Lainey was sharing amusing stories from her youth, and Shauna was laughing. Suddenly, Lainey became serious and said, "Thank you, Shauna." "For what?" Shauna asked, puzzled. "For giving me a daughter, even if only for a short time. You fulfilled my dream. When I was young, I always dreamed of having a beautiful daughter. I even had a name picked out. But I ended up working in orphanages my whole life, raising other people's children. God never blessed me with my own." She sighed heavily and wrapped herself more tightly in a warm blanket. "Do you regret the life you've lived?" Shauna asked. "No, darling, my late husband and I raised 5 wonderful boys. Each of them has done well in life and has a family. I don't regret anything. I keep in touch with all of them, they are wonderful. But after Len, my husband, died, I could never get used to the loneliness, the eerie, ringing silence. Of course, I could call my sons, and they would come. But I understand that they have their own lives and problems. I don't want to trouble them. Thank God you agreed to my proposal." Shauna vividly remembered her first encounter with Lainey. By that time, she had stopped waiting for her mother and no longer believed in miracles. Lainey, on the other hand, had become very attached to Shauna and was ready to take her into her family. But Shauna refused. Her faith in adults had been shaken, and she preferred to rely on herself, believing that no one needed her. At that time, Lainey really liked Shauna. But the child was afraid of being betrayed again. She couldn't endure another letdown. Snapping out of her troubling memories, Shauna looked at Lainey's thoughtful face and said, "You're amazing. It must have been hard raising 5 boys, each with their own personality. Your Scott was quite the whirlwind." "Scott was always my favorite," Lainey laughed. "Yes, he had a very difficult personality, but was that really a problem? To be honest, I always felt like they were all mine, my own." She paused for a second and then whispered, "And now I have a daughter, too. She's my own. And I'm the happiest I've ever been." Shauna's heart started racing. No one had ever called her that word before, daughter. She smiled, looked away shyly, and remained silent. Deep down, she wanted to jump up, hug Lainey, and tell her that she loved her too and that Lainey had long been like a mother to her. But Shauna couldn't. Maybe later, she thought, she would tell her everything. But not now. She felt so ashamed that she hadn't given this wonderful woman a chance all those years ago. Maybe her life would be completely different now. Shauna went to bed a little after midnight, happy but slightly exhausted. A few hours later, she woke up struggling to breathe. Hearing a strange crackling above her, she quickly covered her face with a blanket, jumped out of bed, and ran to wake Lainey. shouting, "Lainey, wake up, there's a fire." Shauna burst into her room and began shaking her with all her strength, but Lainey didn't respond. Realizing that Lainey had inhaled too much smoke, Shauna decided to drag her outside as quickly as possible. Half an hour later, Shauna was sitting on an old stump, watching the ambulance drive away, taking Lainey to the hospital. Nearby, the familiar house was burning down. Neighbors were running around in panic, and firefighters were working to extinguish the flames. Shauna silently watched the scene. It felt like time had stopped. Neighbors occasionally approached her, asking how she was feeling and if she needed any help. But Shauna just shook her head. One thought kept pulsing in her mind. I will never forgive myself if anything happens to Lainey. I never got the chance to tell her. I didn't have time for anything. The thought of what could have happened if she hadn't woken up made her tremble. Dawn was breaking. Shauna wiped her tears with the sleeve of her dirty pajamas. Suddenly, she was startled by a man's voice behind her. "Miss, are you all right?" Shauna turned around and saw one of the firefighters. He was tired, covered in soot, but he looked at her with a gentle smile. "I don't know," she shrugged. "Don't worry, your mom will be fine. It's a shame we couldn't save the house, but the important thing is that everyone is alive. You can trust me on that." "Alive," Shauna repeated quietly, staring at the ruins. "You must be freezing. I brought you a jacket. Do you have somewhere to go? I can give you a ride. By the way, my name is Finn." "Shauna. What a beautiful name. So, Shauna, where can I take you?" The girl sighed heavily. She understood that she had nowhere to go. Besides Lainey, she had no family, and the thought of sleeping on the street terrified her. "Nowhere, really. Thanks, but I think I'll just stay here." "What do you mean? Do you have any relatives, or is it just your mom?" Finn asked. "She's not my mom. I'm from an orphanage, so I have nowhere to go. But don't worry about me, I'll figure something out." Tears welled up again and streamed down her cheeks. For some reason, she found herself telling this complete stranger the complicated story of her life. To her surprise, he listened intently, squatting down in front of her. "Please, don't think I'm complaining," Shauna said, "I just suddenly felt the need to talk. It's probably the nerves." "I'm really glad you told me," Finn smiled, glancing at his watch. "Are you in a hurry?" "Yeah, I'm on duty. But you know, I have an idea. I understand we've just met, but I really want to help. So, I'm inviting you to stay with me for a while." "What do you mean?" Shauna was puzzled. In the most decent way, Finn laughed. "I have an apartment that's currently empty because I live with my parents. As you can see, my job isn't easy, and it's inconvenient to rush to calls from the other side of the city every time. And you need a place." He immediately pulled a set of keys out of his pocket and handed them to Shauna. "Take them, don't be shy." "But I can't," she shook her head. "You certainly can. Think about it, it's better than sleeping on the street. It's just help, no strings attached." He leaned down, took her small hand, and placed the keys in it. She watched his movements, unsure of what to do. On one hand, she couldn't fathom his intentions. Did he really just want to help her? Could someone really help a stranger without any ulterior motive? On the other hand, the idea of sleeping on the street didn't bring any joy either. She had never been in such a situation before and had no one to ask for advice. Meanwhile, Finn pulled out his phone and started dialing a number. "All right, Shauna, a taxi will be here soon to take you to the address. In the meantime, come warm up in our truck." Despite her protests, he insisted and, taking her hand, led her to the truck. He introduced her to his colleagues, and when the taxi arrived, he helped her into the car and slipped some cash into her jacket pocket. Saying that Shauna felt awkward would be an understatement. But with no other options, she waved to him and, sitting in the back seat, closed her eyes. She pondered the whole way, trying to recall who Finn reminded her of. His face seemed vaguely familiar, but she had no idea where they might have met before. After a while, she heard. "We're here. How much do I owe you?" Shauna handed the driver a bill, but he just smiled. "Your husband already paid." "He's just a friend," Shauna said, blushing. "Sorry about that." "It's okay, thank you." Shauna got out of the car and walked towards the building. Along with the keys in her pocket, there was a folded piece of paper smudged with soot. On it, Finn had written the entrance number, floor, and apartment. As she entered the building, a cool breeze hit her. It was very quiet, and her cautious footsteps echoed throughout the hall. She reached the second floor and stopped at the right door. Struggling with the locks, she finally entered the small apartment and immediately noticed the lack of a woman's touch. The furniture was nice, and the apartment didn't seem empty, but it lacked coziness. She walked around, noticing the thick layer of dust covering the furniture. When she opened the fridge, she saw it was unplugged. So, he wasn't lying. He really hasn't lived here for a while, Shauna murmured to herself. She washed up and lay down on the big couch in the living room, covering herself with a thin blanket she found in the closet. She fell asleep almost instantly. A noise woke her up. Struggling to open her eyes, she sat up on the couch, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It was the doorbell. Someone was persistently ringing the doorbell. She got up, dragging her feet, and made her way to the hallway. "Who is it?" "Shauna, don't be afraid, it's me," she heard Finn's voice and immediately tensed up. Why was he here? What should she do now? Open the door. But she didn't want to be alone in an apartment with a stranger. Not open it. But he was the owner. She stared at the door in confusion, but Finn came to her rescue. "Don't open the door. We agreed this is your home now. I'll leave the bags by the door. I bought you some groceries. My sister sent over some clothes too. I think they'll fit. Is everything okay?" "Yes, thank you," Shauna managed to say. "Great, then. I'll be going. Oh, by the way, we put out the fire at your house. As soon as the cause is determined, I'll let you know. But I can tell you it wasn't the wiring or the fireplace." "We didn't light the fireplace," Shauna said in surprise. "Are you saying someone set the fire on purpose?" "Well, it's possible. I'm not an expert, so I can't say for sure. Also, one of the bags has a cell phone in it. The SIM card is new, and I saved my number in it. Just in case. So, if you need anything, call me. Deal?" "Alright. Finn, thank you so much. Once I get back on my feet, I'll repay you." But he didn't respond. Watching through the peephole, she saw him smile, wave, and run down the stairs. She went to the window, ensuring he had indeed left, and then pulled a couple of heavy bags into the apartment. One was full of groceries, enough to last her a week. The other had clothes, a mobile phone, and an envelope. "Money?" Shauna exclaimed in surprise, opening the paper bag. Inside was also a note. She quickly took it out and read it. "Shauna, use this money to buy whatever you need. I know you might be angry with me right now and might want to call and scold me. But please don't. I've been a firefighter for many years and often see people lose everything in minutes. I just want to help you. It's from the heart." Shauna sat on the couch and read the message again. She couldn't understand what motivated this man. Why was he helping her? He brought clothes, money, groceries. It couldn't be just out of kindness. Finn must be hiding something. He must have an agenda. But what it was and how much it would cost her, she didn't know, and it worried her a lot. All the following week, Shauna ran around the city, trying to replace the documents lost in the fire. Balancing between work and errands, she made sure to regularly visit Lainey in the hospital. Thankfully, Lainey's condition had stabilized, and she was in good hands with the doctors. "I have no idea how this could have happened to us," Lainey said when Shauna visited her. "But I know for sure I turned everything off at night. And we had the wiring replaced a few years ago. It's not that old." "I'm puzzled too," Shauna replied. "Well, maybe it's a sign. Time to start fresh. My boys have been arguing over who will take me in. I never thought I meant so much to them. By the way, I could talk to them. I'm sure they'll have room for you too." "No need," Shauna smiled. "I'm staying with Finn for now. I'm still amazed at the kindness of people in this world. When I came to, the first thing I thought about was you. How are you? Where will you go? What will you do? And when I found out a firefighter took you in, I couldn't believe it. I thought you were joking. Are you sure you can trust him?" She looked at Shauna, who nodded immediately. "Well, okay. But still, talk to the neighbors, find out more about him. We need to be sure he's not up to anything." "All right, I'll try." "And you," Shauna paused for a moment and looked at Lainey strangely. "Get well soon, Mom." Lainey's eyes widened as she grabbed Shauna's hand, pressed it to her lips, and whispered, "I will, my dear daughter. Now I'll get better 3 times faster." Tears instantly filled Lainey's eyes and slowly rolled down her cheeks. The next day, remembering Lainey's advice, Shauna decided to find out more about the owner of the apartment who was helping her so much. If it weren't for financial difficulties, she would have moved out already, but she knew she couldn't do that yet. Her savings had burned along with the documents, and her salary was delayed at work. Returning from the store in the evening, Shauna saw some elderly neighbors sitting on a bench near the entrance and sat down next to them. The women were animatedly discussing something, but when Shauna joined them, they fell silent and looked at her in surprise. "Lost?" one of them asked. "No," Shauna smiled. "I live here, in apartment 6. I just need a plumber. The faucet in the kitchen is leaking. I thought I'd ask you since you've probably lived here a long time. Maybe you know a good handyman. By the way, my name is Shauna." The women exchanged glances, and one of them said, "I'm Ellen. We always ask Jake from apartment 36 for help. He should be back from work soon, you can ask him." "So, you're renting a place in our building?" "No," Shauna smiled again. "Finn is my friend and offered to let me stay with him for a while." Shauna spoke, watching her companions closely for their reactions. "Really? Interesting. Why interesting?" Shauna didn't understand. "Well, Finn is a wonderful man. Kind, responsive. He saves lives. He even helped me with my renovations last year. But he hasn't had any luck with girlfriends, and his mom has given up hope that he'll ever get married. And, by the way, we talked to her recently, and she didn't mention he had a girlfriend." Shauna realized she was on the right track. After chatting with the women for a bit longer, she learned everything they knew and, feeling accomplished, went home. As it turned out, Finn grew up in a family of medical professionals. His parents were well educated and worked at the local hospital. However, Finn chose a different path and had been working at the fire department for several years, where he was highly regarded. According to the neighbor, Ellen, Finn was the ideal husband material, and they were genuinely surprised that he was still single. "I think it's because of his job," Ellen said. "No one likes it when their husband is gone day and night at work. And it's a dangerous profession, anything can happen." After talking to Ellen, Shauna felt much more at ease. She was now almost entirely convinced that Finn was a decent man who genuinely wanted to help her out of kindness. The next day, Shauna visited Lainey and recounted all the information she had gathered. 2 weeks had passed since Shauna moved into Finn's place. She had been so busy with her daily tasks that she hadn't noticed Finn hadn't called in a few days. Finding it strange, she decided to call him, but his phone was off. She kept trying throughout the day but couldn't reach him. She started to worry, wondering what could keep him so occupied that he turned off his phone. By evening, she felt she was being silly. He might be busy with something or someone. Just because his mother and neighbors don't know about a girlfriend doesn't mean he doesn't have one. Maybe he's just keeping it private to avoid unnecessary attention, Shauna thought, realizing she was jealous. The next morning, Shauna's phone finally rang. She quickly grabbed it, leaving the dishes in the sink. "Hello. Hi, sorry, I was on shift yesterday and got so busy I forgot to call," Finn said apologetically. "How are you? Do you need anything?" "No, I have everything I need," Shauna replied, blushing. "You hadn't called for a few days, so I wanted to check if you were okay." "Yeah, everything's fine. Listen, I wanted to invite you to an event, but I'm not sure how you'd feel about it. You see, it's my mom's 50th birthday on Saturday. We're celebrating at home, just family, and she really wants to meet you." There was a rustling sound, and then a pleasant female voice came on the line. "Hello, Shauna. My name is Louisa. Forgive my impatience, but Finn told me about the wonderful girl from the fire. I decided to invite you to my birthday. You won't refuse me, will you?" Shauna wanted to sink through the floor and cursed herself for getting involved in this. "Well, honestly, I don't know." "Oh, please, say yes," the woman said. "All right," Shauna managed to say, pressing her hand to her forehead. She wanted to get to know Finn better, but meeting his parents was not part of her plan. The thought of it terrified her. There was more rustling on the phone, and Finn's voice came back on. "Sorry, my mom, she..." "It's okay," Shauna laughed. "I'll come to the birthday, but I don't know where it is." "Really? Great. I honestly thought you'd refuse," Finn exclaimed, then paused. "I'll pick you up at 10 on Saturday. I'll wait for you outside." "No," Shauna replied. "Come up when you arrive. I want to talk to you." As Saturday approached, Shauna grew increasingly anxious. She bought a new outfit but had no idea what to talk about with Finn's parents. On Saturday morning, she was extremely nervous, thinking about the upcoming meeting. She tried to imagine what it would be like to have real parents who cared for and loved her. When her thoughts turned to her own mother, Shauna stopped abruptly. She didn't want to know anything about her family and forbade herself from even thinking about their existence, especially about the woman who had given her life and then, for unknown reasons, abandoned her. Trying to push away the negative thoughts, Shauna went to the window. The ringing of her phone startled her. "Hi." Finn's voice came from the phone. "I'm downstairs." "Hi, can you come up?" Shauna asked, trying to spot his car in the parking lot. "Sure, be right there." Shauna hurried to the hallway, glancing at herself in the mirror. She concluded that she looked quite good. The gray slacks accentuated her figure, and the mint-colored blouse added a fresh touch to her appearance. Her long, blonde hair was styled simply, and her light makeup was understated. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps in the stairwell, and then Finn appeared on the landing. Tall and dark-haired, wearing a blue shirt and black trousers, he looked nothing like the Soot Street firefighter Shauna had first met. He gave her a once-over and smiled broadly. "Hi," he said softly. "You look amazing." "Thanks. Come in." "How much time do we have?" she asked. "We've got a bit of time." "You wanted to talk, right?" Finn said, stepping into the apartment. "Wow," he exclaimed, "it's never been this clean. Thank you so much." "Oh, it's nothing," Shauna replied with an embarrassed smile. "Thank you for letting me stay here. I'm looking for a suitable apartment, and as soon as I find one, I'll move out." "No need," Finn said. "I've been needing someone to look after the place. I didn't want to rent it out to just anyone. You're different." Feeling her cheeks burn, Shauna decided to change the subject. "I wanted to ask you something." Finn looked at her attentively and smiled. Unused to such attention from a man, Shauna wished she could sink into the ground to avoid his gaze. "Have we met somewhere before?" she asked. "I have this feeling we've crossed paths, but I can't remember where." "Well, if we had, believe me, I would remember," Finn said. "Then I guess it's just my imagination," Shauna said. "Shall we go? It's not polite to be late." The drive took no more than half an hour. Finn shared funny stories from his life, trying to put her at ease, but Shauna remained tense. "Don't worry," Finn suddenly said. "My mom is really nice." "Yeah, I'm not worried," Shauna replied. "All right. Wait in the car, I'll go out first and open the umbrella." "It's raining." Before Shauna could protest, she found herself alone in the car. When she finally stepped under the umbrella, she protested. "But you'll get wet." "It's okay," Finn said, handing her a large bouquet that had been lying on the back seat. "The flowers need to stay dry, otherwise, I'll have to find new ones." "Thank you, dear," Louisa said, seeing the bouquet. "My favorite white roses." "You remembered." Finn nodded proudly and then said. "Meet Shauna. This is my mom, Louisa." Louisa examined Shauna closely, smiling, though her eyes remained cold. She looked far younger than 50, dressed in an elegant lilac dress and low-heeled shoes, bearing a striking resemblance to Finn. "Hello," Shauna said, blushing. "Happy birthday." "Thank you, dear." "Come in," Louisa invited, not taking her eyes off Shauna. "Finn, go change. You're all wet." An adorable blonde girl, slightly younger than Finn, suddenly appeared in the spacious hallway. "And this is my sister, Charlotte," Finn said with a sigh, excusing himself and heading deeper into the apartment. "Hello," Charlotte smirked. "So, you're the famous Shauna. Now I get it." "Charlotte, go change," Louisa said. "We're about to sit down for dinner." "Okay, Mom." After Charlotte left, Louisa adjusted her hair and said dryly. "Excuse her, she just got up and isn't ready yet. Let's go to the living room." Entering the spacious living room, Shauna saw a long table in the center adorned with various delicacies. Utensils were neatly arranged beside each plate, yet despite everyone smiling, Shauna felt uneasy. Finn's mother, Louisa, made it clear with her demeanor that they were not equals. In fact, she didn't hide the fact that she didn't particularly like Shauna. But Shauna had no choice but to endure and wait for this celebration to end. Martin, Finn's father, was slightly more friendly than his wife. However, like her, he approached the guest cautiously. "So, you're a chef," Louisa clarified, once they all sat down at the table and started eating. "Yes," Shauna replied. "Well, not a bad profession, I would even say, in demand. In our family, everyone has a college degree." "It's just the way things are," Louisa remarked. "If I had the opportunity to go to college, believe me, I would also have a degree," Shauna replied, as if justifying herself. "Mama, tell us about your work," Finn tried to change the subject. "I think Shauna would be interested to hear about the hospital. But I feel if I start talking about work, you'll find it boring." "By the way, Finn mentioned that your friend is currently in our hospital," Louisa said. "Yes," Shauna nodded. "And what's her name?" "Lainey Corbin. She's like a mom to me." Louisa and Martin exchanged glances, and Charlotte struggled to suppress a smirk. "Strange, haven't heard of her. But then again, not surprising. We have a huge number of patients," Louisa said. "But she's getting discharged soon." "That's good. So, Shauna, have you found a place for yourself yet?" Louisa suddenly asked. "I heard it's hard for orphans to adjust." Finn shot an angry glance at his mother. "Shauna is currently living in my apartment." Martin nodded in agreement, and Louisa, pursing her lips, stared directly at the guest and said, "Am I against it?" "Great," Finn said. "Let's raise our glasses." "Yes, we got distracted," Martin chimed in. Let's give out the gifts. Shauna sighed with relief and watched as Finn and his father began to congratulate his mother. Suddenly, she came to the conclusion that they would never like her. They were too different. Moreover, Louisa clearly harbored suspicions about Shauna's past and her living in Finn's apartment. How long this would last, no one knew. Perhaps Louisa thought Shauna had her eye on her son. Then her hostile attitude would be understandable. Finn was uncomfortable with his family's behavior, but no matter how hard he tried to lighten the mood, it was in vain. Just as the formalities were concluded and dessert was being served, Finn suddenly grabbed his phone. "Mom, I apologize, but I'm urgently needed at work." "Very unfortunate," Louisa said, disappointed, and glanced at Shauna. "It was nice meeting you, Shauna. I wish your mother a speedy recovery." Finn quickly stood up and, taking Shauna's hand, pulled her along. "Are you sure you can't stay?" his mother asked, trying to catch her son's eye. "When should I expect you?" "Mom, I don't know. I think not before morning," he muttered. Louisa shot an annoyed look at Shauna and pursed her lips. "Call so I don't worry." "Goodbye, Shauna." Without waiting for a response, she abruptly turned and disappeared into the living room. "I'm sorry," Finn said quietly. "Honestly, I don't understand what's gotten into them." "Finn, wait!" Charlotte shouted. "Remember you promised to get tickets to the theater? They're on your desk." "Oh, thanks." Charlotte smiled at her brother, then whispered, "Don't be mad at Mom, she's just not herself today. And besides, it's your job." "Charlotte, that's no excuse for her behavior," Finn replied. Charlotte wanted to say something else, but after glancing at Shauna, she fell silent. "Okay, let's go," Finn said. "Goodbye," Shauna said, noticing a strange expression on Charlotte's face, and she left the apartment. Several flights of stairs they descended in silence, and then Finn abruptly stopped. He looked guilty. "I have no idea what's gotten into them. But I can tell you for sure, my mom isn't like that. Sure, she has periods of discontent when she grumbles for no reason. But she would never intentionally hurt or humiliate anyone. It feels like they've been replaced. They just really love you," Shauna shrugged. "We're just too different, that's all." "What do you mean?" Finn asked. Shauna looked away. She didn't want to discuss obvious things with Finn, let alone blame his parents. So, she quickly changed the subject. "Does your mom not like your job?" "Well, that's putting it mildly. If she could fire me, she would have done it a long time ago," he chuckled. "Every time I'm at work, she worries. But honestly, I understand her." Finn looked thoughtfully at Shauna and was about to say something when she suddenly snapped out of her thoughts. "You're late, hurry up, I'll get there myself. The rain has already stopped." "No one called me, Shauna. I just said the first thing that came to mind. I'm tired of this charade. Although we really should hurry before Charlotte notices my car in the yard and starts asking why I'm still here." Smiling, Shauna hurried down. She tried to keep herself together, pretending that what happened at the birthday party didn't bother her at all. However, she felt bad inside. In her childhood spent in an orphanage, she had often been the target of teasing and ridicule, and back then she had learned restraint. She understood Louisa perfectly well and saw no point in blaming Finn for anything. But she had decided once and for all that she would have to leave his apartment soon. Otherwise, a scandal would inevitably ensue. Outside, the scent of rain still lingered, and the clouds were slowly dispersing. Lost in admiration of nature, Shauna momentarily forgot where she was. It wasn't until Finn appeared in front of her that she snapped out of it. "Are you coming?" he asked. She nodded silently and headed towards the car. "By the way, how's Lainey feeling?" Finn inquired. "She's doing great. I think she'll be discharged next week." "Great. Then we'll go pick her up together." Shauna looked at Finn in confusion, and he added. "You'll both stay with me." "No, there's no need. Lainey has 5 sons, one of them will take her in." 5 sons. Wow. Finn started the engine, and the car slowly headed towards the bustling road. The next day, when Shauna visited Lainey, she ran into Scott in the hospital corridor, which surprised her greatly. Of course, he was no longer the difficult teenager but a man who had everything a once-abandoned child could dream of. But how much they both had gone through to transform Scott from a prickly boy full of resentments and contradictions into a kind, caring child and loving son, no one really knew. When Lainey saw the bright-haired 10-year-old boy in the orphanage, she immediately decided to take him in. The entire staff tried to dissuade her, citing that the boy was angry at the whole world and would most likely not grow up normally. Lainey wouldn't listen to anyone. She believed in the power of love and kindness, and now Scott was all grown up with his own big house, job, wife, and child. Spotting Shauna, he smiled. "Hey, we were just talking about you," he said. "Hello," Shauna blushed. "How is Lainey?" "She's fine." "Listen, Shauna, we need to talk. Let's step over to the window." Slightly nervous, she followed him. Scott seemed troubled about something. "I found out today that the fire wasn't accidental. It was arson," he said. "What?" Shauna exclaimed. "But who would want to do that?" "I don't know," Scott sighed heavily. "Mom is upset. I've been checking into the investigator handling the case. Seems like a thorough person. Hopefully, we'll know everything soon." Shauna noticed something unsettling in Scott's expression. "I hope you're not thinking of revenge," she said cautiously. "Not revenge," Scott replied. "But I intend to see this person punished. Mom, by the way, is getting discharged on Wednesday. I'll take her home with me that day. By the way, she mentioned you're staying with a firefighter. If you want, I can find a place for you too. We have a big house." "Thank you, but I'll stay here," Shauna declined. "Well, if you change your mind, just call. By the way, we've decided to buy Mom a small house. My brother is already looking. But we're keeping it a surprise from her," he grinned. "Great." Shauna smiled broadly and bid farewell to Scott, then entered Lainey's hospital room. Lainey was sitting in bed, focused on reading a magazine. When she saw Shauna, she immediately set it aside and smiled. "Shauna, my dear girl, so glad you came. Scott visited me," she said. "We chatted in the corridor," Shauna replied. "Did he tell you about the arson?" Lainey asked. "Yes, but I think it might be a mistake, Lainey. Who would want to set fire to your place?" "I think so too. The grass was dry, it hadn't rained much. Maybe someone tossed a cigarette without thinking. And here we are," Lainey shrugged. Shauna nodded silently. "Scott is so determined about this. He said he'll get to the truth no matter what and punish the guilty," Lainey continued. "But I'm against it. Our home is gone, we can't bring it back. We need to start fresh. You know, the only thing I truly regret is the burnt photographs. And did you know they're discharging me on Wednesday?" Shauna nodded again. "Now tell me, how are things with you?" Lainey asked. "You went to his mother's birthday, right?" "Everything's fine," Shauna lied. "Lovely people. They have a whole medical dynasty, and they all work at this hospital." "Even his sister?" Lainey inquired. "Yes, she just finished medical school," Shauna confirmed. Lainey studied Shauna intently, then lowered her voice and said. "What's wrong? You can try to dodge it all you want, but you won't fool me." "Nothing, really. Just can't shake off thoughts about the arson," Shauna admitted. "Really?" "Shauna, I've known you for years, dear," Lainey said softly. Shauna looked embarrassed. "It's all fine, honestly. I probably won't be able to visit tomorrow, but I'll definitely be there when you're discharged, Shauna assured her. Lainey sighed heavily and shook her head. Well, okay, she said reluctantly. By Wednesday noon, Shauna, along with Scott and his wife Stacy, picked up Lainey from the hospital. The mood was upbeat. Stacy sat in the front seat, regaling them with funny stories from recent events. Shauna, are you sure you don't want to stay with us? Stacy asked. No, Shauna replied curtly. So, that firefighter really is a good guy? Stacy pressed on. He's good. But I'm planning to find my own place soon, Shauna said. Why though? Good men don't come around so easily, Stacy teased. Shauna shot Stacy a stern look, and Stacy waved her hands in surrender. Relax, I was just asking, Stacy reassured. Girls, don't argue, Lainey intervened. But I think Stacy is right. You shouldn't walk away from good men. They aren't that plentiful. But Shauna isn't a little girl anymore, I'm sure she'll figure it out on her own. Shauna didn't respond and turned to look out the window. Stacy's comment had struck a nerve. They didn't know it wasn't about Finn at all, but about his parents. Even Finn himself treated her as someone who just needed his help. Nothing more. And Nina misses her grandmother so much, Stacy exclaimed. I miss her too. Lainey laughed. Now we'll have plenty of time for long talks. Scott and Stacy exchanged glances, and Shauna noticed Stacy was smiling somewhat knowingly. It seemed like she wasn't telling the whole story. After a short visit at Lainey's younger son's place, Shauna prepared to head home, with Stacy insisting on seeing her off to the bus stop. What happened? Shauna asked once they left the apartment. The guys finally settled on a house for Lainey. The paperwork's almost done, Stacy said. That's wonderful, Shauna replied. And that's not all, Stacy continued. Scott recently spoke with the investigator, and it seems they have a suspect now. Shauna stopped abruptly and looked at her questioningly. It's their neighbor, Eddie Reed, remember him? He's always been a bit odd. But I don't think it's him, Stacy said. I'm leaning towards someone from the orphanage. You mean the staff? Shauna clarified. Maybe them too, Stacy nodded. It can't be. Lainey is loved by her colleagues. Besides, she resigned a year ago. Well, I don't know, Stacy sighed. If you ever think about it, you know my number. Scott doesn't quite agree with my theory, but I think there might be something to it. On the way to the bus stop, they chatted about various topics and said their goodbyes. Comfortably settled on the bus seat, Shauna couldn't shake Stacy's words from her mind. So when Finn called, she found herself unable to focus on the conversation, frequently answering off track. In the courtyard of her home, Shauna noticed a woman sitting on a bench not far from the entrance. Her face seemed familiar, as if they had crossed paths before. The stranger was a brunette, dressed plainly in a black and white polka dot sweater and a knee-length skirt. She could easily blend into the crowd of passers-by if not for one distinctive feature that caught attention, a scar on her left cheek. The stranger watched Shauna attentively, and when she approached, she stared intently at her cell phone. Later that evening, Finn arrived with a bag full of groceries. Is something wrong? He asked from the doorway. Seeing Shauna's puzzled expression, he explained. Just talking to you on the phone earlier, I didn't like the sound of your voice. I couldn't settle all day. So as soon as my shift ended, I came straight here. But I'm glad everything's okay. By the way, there's more. Wait here. And with that, he dashed out of the apartment. Shauna obediently stood in the hallway, waiting for something she couldn't quite grasp. When Finn returned, he held a bouquet of beautiful white roses. These are for you, he said, handing her the bouquet. Well, kind of an apology for that incident at my relative's. Honestly, I still feel awkward about it. It's all fine, Shauna reassured him, inhaling the lovely scent of the flowers. But thank you for the flowers. It's very thoughtful. Setting the bouquet in a vase, the young couple sat down for tea. In the kitchen, silence hung heavy, each lost in their own thoughts. Shauna stole glances at Finn, marveling at how much he resembled his mother in appearance. But deep down, they were entirely different. Finn didn't mind that Shauna came from an orphanage, without relatives or a fancy education. Meanwhile, Louisa, on the other hand, wanted her son to steer clear of girls like Shauna. Everyone needed to find someone more suitable for each other. But at the same time, Shauna was sure that Finn wouldn't go against his mother's wishes because he didn't want to hurt her. That's why she feared the attachment growing stronger in her heart every day. By the way, Finn broke the silence. Have you heard that the investigator has a suspect now? Shauna nodded. Yes, I heard. So what do you think? Do you think it's Lainey's neighbor? He asked. I don't know. It could be the neighbor. There's also a theory that it could be someone from Lainey's former colleagues at the orphanage. But honestly, I don't understand the motives behind either the neighbor or her colleagues. I can't fathom who would do such a thing. I'm more inclined to believe it was a discarded cigarette or dry grass, just a stupid accident. Sorry to disappoint you, Finn said, but the fire started in the gazebo. But it's right next to the house and quite a distance from the fence, Shauna exclaimed. That's what I thought too. I talked to the guys, and they told me right away that it was most likely deliberate. Someone sneaked into your yard, poured flammable liquid on the bench, and voila. Maybe they splashed some on the porch too. It all went up in flames instantly. Shauna stared at him wide-eyed, struggling to believe what she was hearing but understanding it could very well be true. But why? She whispered. I have no idea, Finn sighed. In my time as a firefighter, I've learned one thing. People often behave very strangely and often can't explain the reasons behind their own actions. I don't mean to scare you, but I think you and Lainey need to be very careful. By the way, does she live with her son? Well, for now, yes. What do you mean, for now? Finn didn't understand. Well, the guys found her a place, and they're almost done with the paperwork, Shauna explained. Well, that's not the best idea, Finn warned. She shouldn't move there, at least until the investigation is over. Talk to her son about it in the morning. Or if you want, I can do it myself. No need. I'll call him in the morning. Do you think I'm in danger too? I think you should be more cautious, Finn replied. By the way, if you want, I could stay with you for a while. There are 2 rooms, so there's enough space for everyone. No, that's definitely not a good idea, Shauna smiled. I'm afraid Louisa wouldn't take our behavior well. We could all end up in trouble. But I really appreciate your concern. First of all, I don't want to come between you and your mother. And secondly, I don't see the need for you to look after me. Alright, Finn agreed. Regarding my mom, I assure you, you've misunderstood her. She's a very good person, just skeptical. Sometimes I feel like it's their job that's to blame. Both Dad and Charlotte are the same. If it weren't for that quality, maybe they couldn't heal people. I mean, I'm not perfect either, he chuckled. After birthday, Mom and I talked about you, and believe me, she regrets and worries just as much as I do about how things turned out. It's just the excitement. Well, you know, I can't say for sure how I would react if my son brought home someone I didn't know, Shauna said. Finn burst out laughing. Well, you talk as if I brought a bearded hobo home. By the way, I wanted to ask, why did you decide to help me? She asked. I don't know, he replied, suddenly serious. When I saw you, I just decided that if I left and didn't help you, I would regret it later. And after you told me about your life, even more so. Well, I should go, he glanced at his watch. It's late already, and you have work tomorrow. Yeah, she muttered, blushing. Then I'll leave. I'll call you every day, and if you don't pick up, expect a visit. Closing the door behind Finn, she listened intently. The apartment was filled with a ringing silence, punctuated only by the ticking of the large kitchen clock. A dreadful, incomprehensible fear enveloped her from head to toe, and she already regretted refusing Finn's offer. Stepping cautiously on the soft carpet, Shauna looked out the window and waved to the guy near the car. Over the next few days, she was troubled. The thought of arson drove her nearly insane. However, Shauna worried not for herself but mostly because Lainey didn't take Finn's and Stacy's version seriously. "Nonsense," she replied. "I'm not that important a person for anyone to seek revenge on." On Friday after work, Shauna decided to visit Lainey. She found her in the yard, chatting animatedly with a woman Shauna didn't recognize. It turned out to be a neighbor Lainey had met a few days ago. After spending about 10 minutes together, the neighbor finally said her goodbyes, leaving Shauna and Lainey alone. "You look wonderful." Shauna smiled. "And that dress suits you so well. Is it new? I don't think I've seen you wear it before." "Stacy bought it for me," Lainey said, blushing a little. "And she even got the size right. By the way, the investigator called. He wants me to come in because they've discovered something new. Honestly, I just want this all to be over. We can't stop now, Lainey. We need to find out the truth." "Why?" "Come on, Lainey. How could we not? By the way, I have a delicate question for you. How can I find my relatives?" Lainey was silent for a moment before speaking quietly. "You've decided to find your mother?" "I'm not sure yet. But I want to know who she is and where she lives. Maybe I have brothers or sisters." "You read my file, right?" "Of course," Lainey nodded. "I wanted to take you in and become your guardian, but I went along with your wishes and didn't. I regret that now. But let me ask you a question. Why did you refuse to become my daughter back then?" Shauna hesitated, not expecting such a question. Looking away, she answered. "I was scared. I was afraid to trust you. I feared you would betray me. It was enough that my own family abandoned me. What could I expect from strangers? Prospective parents who visited the orphanage often looked at us like toys. This one I like, I'll take. That one I don't, so I'll leave her on the shelf. Now I understand that I should have agreed back then, but as a little girl, I was terrified." Lainey wiped away a tear and said, "I'm sorry for asking. I already knew the answer. As for your mother, if you really want to know, I can tell you how to find her." "Yes, I've decided. But are you sure she hasn't moved in? Is she still alive?" Lainey clarified. "Of course, she's alive. I saw her at the local market recently. She's here." Shauna gasped. Lainey nodded. "So, all this time, she lived in our city and never visited me?" "Why? She didn't want to upset you. It's easier to believe that your mom moved far away and couldn't visit rather than knowing she lived in the next neighborhood but never came by. Don't you agree? What was the reason I ended up in the orphanage?" Shauna asked. "Your family was considered troubled," Lainey answered evasively. "I always thought the time would come when you'd want to meet her, but I didn't expect it to be so soon." She paused, then waited for Shauna to take out a notebook and pen before dictating the address. "Let me know when you go." "Okay," Shauna promised. "I haven't fully decided if I want to see her or if it's better not to." Lainey nodded. Her good mood vanished, she said. "Would you like to come in for tea?" "Of course. Tomorrow's my day off, so I can stay out a bit later." As Shauna held the door open for Lainey and let her go in first, she was suddenly overcome by an inexplicable urge to look back. She caught a fleeting glimpse of a stranger's gaze before quickly turning away. However, that brief moment was enough for Shauna to recognize the same woman she had seen outside Finn's house yesterday, the brunette with the scar on her face. Quickly stepping inside the building, Shauna felt a chill run through her. This couldn't be a coincidence, as the houses were a 40-minute drive apart. Staying at Laney's until almost 10 in the evening, Shauna accepted Stacy's offer to drive her home. "You seem quiet," Stacy remarked, fastening her seatbelt. "Is something wrong?" "Sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy," Shauna sighed. "How likely is it to keep running into the same person around the city?" "I'm not quite following you." After attentively listening to Shauna's story about the stranger, Stacy said, "Well, you're definitely not crazy. Considering recent events, I'd be cautious too. And there's one more thing," she paused and turned on the blinker, "that you're overlooking." "What do you mean?" Shauna asked, confused. "What if your relatives are somehow connected to the fire?" "Scott and I have been thinking about this. We concluded that no one around Laney would be capable of arson." "I remember you mentioned something similar to me." "Yes," Shauna confirmed, "but what about my relatives? I don't even know if they exist." "Exactly," Stacy said, raising a finger. "First, you need to find out if they exist, where they live, what they do." "Well, actually, I already know my mother's address, but I haven't decided whether to go or not," Shauna said quietly. "I've thought a lot about it and realized that if I don't meet her, I'll never find peace." Stacy parked the car near Finn's house and gazed thoughtfully into the distance. In the dim light, her brown eyes looked even darker, and the corners of her mouth turned down. Usually cheerful and loud, she now seemed unlike herself, lost in thought. Silence filled the car, but after a few seconds, Stacy spoke. "When do you plan to go?" "Probably tomorrow." "Does she live far?" "She lives in a house in the northwest." "That's a pretty dreary area," Stacy chuckled. "More than half the houses are abandoned. I heard they're planning to build a new residential complex there. They're even preparing the project. Do you want me to come with you?" "I'm off tomorrow, and we can tell everyone we're going shopping." Shauna looked at Stacy, unsure of what to say. Her heart began to race, and she felt a shiver down her spine. "I'd be glad to have you with me," she replied. "Good, I really didn't want to let you go alone. I'm surprised you're even considering it. Who knows how it will turn out." "Thanks, Stacy. I should go inside, it's late, and Scott is probably worried about you," Shauna smiled. "I'll be at your place at 9:30 tomorrow, okay?" Stacy said. "Yeah. What about the woman with the scar? I have a feeling we'll find out who she is and why you keep seeing her soon enough." "Do you think she," Shauna began, but trailed off. Stacy shrugged. "We'll find out everything tomorrow." Saturday morning was warm. The area where Stacy and Shauna headed was once home to local factory workers. It used to be a lively place where new families were formed and children grew up. Now, it was just dozens of lifeless wooden ruins. The young people had left, moving to better apartments and taking their elderly parents with them. In one of these wooden houses lived Rayden Green, Shauna's real mother. Shauna was very anxious. She didn't know what kind of woman her mother was, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't picture her face. Was she married? Did she have other children? As Stacy's small silver car slowly drove down the narrow, rocky road past the dilapidated houses, Shauna sat, pressed into her seat, silently looking out the window. "Okay, number 43, 45, Stacy muttered, "Oh, here it is." She pointed out the window and added, "Look, the house looks lived in, at least at first glance. Fairly decent." Shauna looked at the small wooden house. The window frames had once been painted blue, and flowers grew on the windowsill. The gates seemed recently installed, and there was a small children's bicycle abandoned nearby. From the yard came the sound of a dog barking loudly. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Stacy asked cautiously. "Yes." "Then let's go." They approached the gates and, not finding a doorbell, began knocking. Soon, they heard hurried footsteps, and the door creaked open. An elderly woman with sparse gray hair appeared before them. She was dressed in old, worn-out black pants and a once sky-blue sweater now covered in stains of unknown origin. The woman stared at the uninvited guests in surprise. "What do you want?" she said, her voice unexpectedly loud and more like a man's. "We're looking for Rayden Green," Stacy said, trying to be heard over the barking dog. "Does she live here?" "Maybe." "Who are you?" "Please call Rayden. We need to talk to her." The elderly woman squinted, seemed like she wanted to say something else, but then waved her hand and walked towards the porch. "Rayden, come here, someone's here to see you." "Shauna, get a grip," Stacy whispered, tugging at Shauna's sleeve. "If you've changed your mind, we can still leave. We'll be in the car and on our way home in a minute." "No, I'm fine," Shauna replied, shaking off her hesitation. "I'm guessing that's Rayden's mother. What do you think? That would make her your grandmother. She looks to be about 60. Shauna nodded and peered into the yard, trying to focus on her surroundings and not miss a single detail. Behind the tall fence were several wooden outbuildings, and in front of them was a small plot overgrown with grass. Meanwhile, the elderly woman reluctantly climbed the porch steps and flung the door open. "Rayden, get out here. Someone's come to see you." "Who?" "Come and see for yourself." "Why are you yelling?" Woman said, coming out onto the porch. Glancing at Stacy and Shauna, she added, "Them again? When will your office leave us alone? So annoying." It seemed she was the one they were looking for. She walked toward them. Short and plump, with flushed cheeks and small green eyes that seemed to show no emotion, she absently adjusted her dark hair, which was gathered in a bun at the nape of her neck, and said indifferently, "Come in." The dog, straining at its chain, barked even louder. "Are you Rayden?" Shauna asked. "Yes, come into the house before this dog goes crazy," she said, waving at the dog and heading to the porch. "I don't understand why you come so early in the morning. We've just gotten up." Stacy and Shauna exchanged glances. It was obvious they had been mistaken for someone else. To avoid any confusion, they needed to clarify things as soon as possible. Without agreeing on how to start the conversation, Stacy and Shauna just silently entered the house, waiting for the right moment. The air inside was a mix of the smell of milk and something sour. There were things scattered everywhere, cardboard boxes, and old, yellowed newspapers lying around. Rayden turned to her guests and said, "Don't mind the mess, my mother started a deep cleaning yesterday and didn't finish. Where does all this junk come from? Come on in. The kids just got up and are about to have breakfast." Shauna followed Rayden and couldn't believe this woman was her mother. They looked nothing alike, and Shauna even wondered if they had the wrong address. Or maybe Lainey had made a mistake. "Who do they think we are, and who are these kids?" Stacy whispered. "I have no idea," Shauna replied. "All right, let's keep pretending. Let's see what she has to say. Are you coming?" Rayden called from the other room. Stacy squeezed Shauna's hand for a moment, and they walked into a small room filled with bright sunlight. If it weren't for the clutter, the room would have been fairly pleasant. To the left of the entrance was a small fireplace and gray cabinets that seemed to serve as a kitchen. The floor was old wood, and near the window stood a wooden table where the children were sitting. Two little girls, about 5 years old and very similar to each other, were reluctantly eating. A skinny boy, who looked old enough to be in elementary school, was watching the unfamiliar women warily. "Rayden, clear the chairs," the woman in the blue sweater called. "Have a seat." Rayden offered, moving the clothes from the chairs. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you," Shauna declined. "You are Rayden Green, right?" "Yes, and I suppose you're new at their office," Rayden assumed. "This is my mother, Bridget. The kids are well fed, eating their porridge. The fridge is full, you can check. Vince, my husband, works and doesn't drink anymore. So I have no complaints about him. But I can't seem to get a job." Who would take care of the house then? Someone has to. My mother's too old now. And honestly, I don't understand why there's so much interest in our family. You've misunderstood us, Shauna mumbled, unable to take her eyes off the hostess. What do you mean? You're not from Child Services? Raiden asked. Shauna shook her head. Then who are you? If it's about debts, ask Vince. But he won't be home until night. How many children do you have? Shauna asked. Well, 4 in total. But the eldest doesn't live with us anymore. Who are you, ladies? Raiden placed her hands on her hips and looked at her guests angrily. And the girl who was born many years ago? Shauna said quietly. She ended up in an orphanage for some reason. Bridget coughed, and Raiden turned pale, saying, Who are you, and why are you here? I'm the girl who was taken away from you at the age of 2, Shauna interrupted. What? No way. Bridget muttered. Raiden looked from Shauna to Stacy in confusion, clutching a kitchen towel in her hand. Then she suddenly stood up and turned to the children. Kids, finish up and go outside. We need to talk in the other room. Shauna and Stacy glanced at the frightened children, then followed Raiden into another room. Sitting down on a large sofa, Raiden looked at Shauna suspiciously from head to toe and pressed her lips together. Yes, you're right. I had a daughter. But I will never believe you are her, she said, pointing a finger at Shauna. Even if I did believe it, then what? Nothing, Shauna replied. I just want to understand why I ended up in an orphanage. Who is my father? And is he still alive? Raiden sighed deeply, rolling her eyes before standing up and pacing back and forth. At that moment, Shauna thought they would be kicked out any minute. However, Raiden sat back down on the couch and said, You want to know the truth, right? Fine, I'll tell you. But promise me I'll never see you here again. Because if Vince finds out. Stacy and Shauna exchanged glances. No problem. I don't need anything from you, Shauna replied, trying to steady her trembling voice. Raiden, still distrustful, listened to the sounds coming from outside the door. Only after ensuring the children had gone outside did she begin her story. Raiden was born into a family of simple workers and was the youngest of 4 children. Her mother, Bridget, rarely worked and mainly took care of the house. Her father, Luke, worked at the local factory, providing for the family but was a heavy drinker and took little part in raising the children. Bridget was unhappy with the situation but had nowhere else to go, so she had to accept things as they were. From a young age, Raiden constantly heard her mother complain about how difficult it was to raise 4 children who were always causing trouble and didn't want to study properly. Bridget often said that her life would have been better without children and even discouraged her older daughters from getting married too early. When Raiden turned 14 and her mother saw her with a boy, there was a serious conversation that evening. You're too young to be thinking about boys, you need to focus on your studies, Bridget insisted. If you get pregnant, you'll bring shame on the whole family. We already have enough trouble with your father embarrassing us in front of the neighbors. Will and I are just friends, Raiden giggled. I've seen your kind of friendship. Finish school first, then you can date boys. Raiden nodded silently, uninterested in lectures from someone who knew nothing about love. She was sure nothing bad would happen to her. And if something did go wrong, she believed a solution would present itself. Fortunately for Bridget, Raiden's relationship with the neighbor boy soon ended. There were other crushes afterward, but Raiden's behavior remained proper. She did well in school, which calmed her mother, who decided that Raiden had come to her senses. Bridget shifted her focus to her older daughters, who by then were already diving into adult life and enjoying their freedom. After finishing school, Raiden, at her mother's insistence, enrolled in college for a major that she neither understood nor cared about. However, after just a year, she met the man of her dreams. Tall, handsome, decisive, and, importantly, generous. He was 5 years older, said all the right things, and promised to do everything to make her happy. She felt like she was flying. Studying quickly took a back seat. Less than 3 months after they met, she decided to move in with her boyfriend. Ignoring her mother's protests, Raiden told her exactly what she thought, packed her things, and left home, vowing never to return. Chad, the guy who had swept her off her feet, was thrilled. But after some time, Raiden was horrified to realize she was pregnant. In despair, she told Chad everything and was ready to run to the hospital, but he dissuaded her. "This is wonderful, darling. Imagine if it's a boy. And if it's a girl," she snorted. "I don't want this, it's too soon for us." "Don't be silly," Chad said. "Instead, think about what we need for the wedding. It's time to start planning." "What? Don't you want to get married?" "Of course I do," Raiden mumbled, not knowing whether to feel happy or sad. "Great. We'll save up some money and get married right away." Chad promised to get a part-time job and start preparing for the wedding as soon as possible, making Raiden swear she would definitely give birth to his son. Time passed, but the promised wedding remained just that, a promise. Chad first blamed his busy schedule, then a lack of money. After their daughter was born, he stopped mentioning the wedding altogether. He quickly grew distant from Raiden, showing no interest in their daughter. When little Shauna, who bore a striking resemblance to her father, turned 1, Chad began coming home less and less. Eventually, he told Raiden that their love had faded and it was time for her to move out. With no education, work experience, or means to support herself, Raiden suddenly found herself on the streets. She didn't dare go to her mother, with whom she hadn't spoken for over a year, so she turned to a friend for help. For a year, Raiden stayed with various friends. She took any job she could find, barely making ends meet, while Shauna posed additional challenges. Eventually, Raiden's patience ran out. Unable to bear the burden any longer, she took Shauna, who was about to turn 2, to an orphanage, promising to return for her in a couple of months once she got back on her feet and found a place to live. "But then you realized it was easier without her?" Stacy asked when Raiden finished her story. "No," Raiden replied calmly. "It wasn't that. During that time, I met Vince, we got married, and started living together. He didn't know I had a child, and still doesn't. Vince is very jealous, you see." She paused, then looked at the pale-faced Shauna and added, "Understand, I started a new life. Chad disappeared and didn't care about the child. What was I supposed to do? Soon after marrying Vince, I got pregnant again. We were short on money, and I had to leave my job due to health problems. I decided you would be better off with another family. How did you end up here?" Shauna asked quietly. "After my father died, my mom and I reconciled. By then, I knew I was expecting twins. Living with my mother-in-law was unbearable, so we agreed to move here, help with the household, and save for a new home." "Did Bridget know about Shauna?" Stacy asked. "Yes. Why didn't she take her in? Mom didn't want to take care of anyone. She had just gotten rid of us. We were all grown up, and she could finally breathe. And now what? Start over? No. She wasn't ready for that." The room fell silent, broken only by the sound of children's laughter from outside. Shauna stared at Raiden, without a trace of remorse or regret in her eyes. Unable to stay in the stifling room any longer, Shauna stood up and headed for the door without a word. "But I did everything right, it all worked out well," Raiden shouted after her. Shauna quickened her pace and within seconds was outside. Her head was buzzing, tears blurred her vision, and she was breathless. She no longer wanted or could bear to see that woman. Outside the gate, Shauna leaned against the sun-warmed car and closed her eyes. "Are you okay?" Stacy asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. Don't listen to her. She's a bad mother." "She's not my mother," Shauna said coldly. "Forget everything we heard here. And please, don't say anything to Lainey. I'll tell her myself. Okay, but are you sure she needs to know? Shauna looked at Stacy and quietly said. Lainey told me I was taken from my family. Taken, you understand? But it turns out it was the opposite. Do you think Lainey kept it from you on purpose? Stacy asked. I can't say for sure. But if I had known the truth from the beginning, I would never have come here and gotten my hopes up, Shauna muttered. She glanced at the once fine house, now devoid of any sympathy, and seeing Raydan in the window, she quickly turned away and got into the car. As a child, Shauna had truly believed that she ended up in the orphanage by mistake, and her mother didn't really want to part with her. It was just how things turned out. She believed that one day her father would find her and take her away. These thoughts warmed the heart of the little girl. Even as an adult, she still harbored the hope that one day she would find her family and everything would fall into place. Now the illusions had evaporated, leaving only emptiness and disappointment behind. In just a couple of hours, Shauna realized that no one in her life was closer or dearer than Lainey. However, even she, as it turned out, hadn't told the whole truth. Shauna decided to find out as soon as possible why Lainey hadn't shared everything. You know, I was sure we'd find that woman with the scar on her face here, Stacy broke the silence. I even thought she might be your mother or sister. But now, I don't know what to think. Shauna gave a sad smile. Maybe I have an overactive imagination, and her appearance was just a coincidence. Maybe she, like me, thinks someone is following her. Besides, I haven't seen her for several days. Okay, but who set the house on fire then? I don't know. Lainey is supposed to meet with the investigator soon. I think he'll figure it out faster than we will. Shauna, I understand you're upset, but don't give up. Honestly, I somewhat agree with Raydan. Who knows how your life would have turned out if she had taken you back then? I understand. Shauna pulled out her phone from her purse and involuntarily smiled. Finn called several times and sent a bunch of messages. Is something wrong? No, we just agreed to stay in touch, and I turned off the sound so I wouldn't be distracted. So he's worried. He's a good guy, that Finn of yours, Stacy said. Yeah, he is. You don't sound too happy. Well, it's just his parents, she hesitated, they're not too fond of my past. And the fact that I'm living in his apartment. I need to move out soon. Oh, don't pay attention to them. You're not living with them, but with Finn. Shauna couldn't help but smile. You talk like we're already dating. Well, it's all ahead. I don't know, Shauna smiled. By the way, when is Lainey going to see the investigator? Stacy stopped the car at the intersection and thoughtfully looked at the road. It's today. Scott was going to go with her. It completely slipped my mind. At that moment, Shauna's phone rang. A familiar number flashed on the screen. Where are you? Are you okay? Finn asked anxiously. Yeah, I'll be home in about 15 minutes. What's up? I found out something about the fire at Lainey's house. I decided to drop by and talk. I'll wait for you near the entrance. Come on up to the apartment. It's your home, after all. Alright, Finn chuckled and hung up. Holding the phone in her hand, Shauna watched the flow of cars and remained silent. Are you nervous? Stacy asked, trying to suppress a smile. No, he said he has news about the fire. Maybe they found out who did it. Hopefully, Shauna sighed. I don't like this at all. Although the incident with Lainey's house had receded into the background, she wanted the culprit caught as soon as possible. Despite trying not to show her anxiety, she felt uneasy knowing that this person could be nearby. Replaying the events of recent years in her mind, she still couldn't understand who could have done such a thing. When Shauna entered the apartment, Finn was already pouring tea into cups. Maybe you'll tell me where you went, he asked. To my biological mother. To your mother? Finn was surprised. But why? Wait, hold on, you must be hungry. Sit down at the table, I made some sandwiches. We'll eat, and you can tell me everything in detail. She quickly washed her hands and returned to the kitchen. As Shauna sat down at the table, Finn abruptly opened the fridge door, causing a loud thud as something fell to the floor. I see you've stocked up the fridge again, Shauna remarked, trying not to laugh. Don't exaggerate. This time I bought the bare minimum, as you asked. But this sauce just had to fall out now. Watching Finn struggle to put the slippery packet back in, Shauna covered her mouth, stifling her laughter. Finn muttered under his breath, trying to manage, but noticing her smile, he also began to laugh. I'll never buy this sauce again. Seriously. Closing the door, he sat down at the table. You're smiling, so my visit wasn't in vain. You wanted to tell me something about the fire, Shauna reminded him, trying not to look into his eyes. Yes, that's true, but first, tell me about your trip. Casting a sad look at Finn, she remained silent for a while, unsure of where to start. She knew Finn was a good listener and probably worried about her as much as Lainey did. As strange as that seemed. When Shauna finished her story, she noticed that Finn looked upset. It's not really my place to judge. I've never even seen that woman, he said, but in this case, I agree with Stacy. That's not a mother, Shauna. I'm so sorry it turned out this way. Honestly, I don't even know what to say in situations like this. There's nothing to say, Shauna smiled. Now it's your turn. You didn't come all the way here on a Saturday for nothing. Oh, the news. I almost forgot. The person who set the fire has been caught. Was it Lainey's neighbor? You know, I doubt he had anything to do with. No. Shauna, it was a woman. Shauna's eyes widened, and she forgot to breathe. Yes, Finn nodded. And I think you know her. At least, you've seen her before. A long time ago. I don't understand who you're talking about, Shauna murmured. Finn was about to say something else, but at that moment, a melodic sound came from the hallway, and Shauna hurried to get her phone. Pulling it from her pocket, she answered without looking and immediately heard Stacy's voice. Shauna, are you home? Yes. Are you alone or with Finn? With Finn, she answered cautiously. What's happened? Nothing good. Lainey and Scott went to see the investigator, and now she's taken a sedative and is resting. The investigator is certainly a professional, no doubt about that, but he's not exactly tactful. Although, I think it's not really about him. Wait, exclaimed Shauna, what did he say? He revealed who started the fire and all the details, Stacy sighed. Lainey asked me not to say anything before she could tell you herself, so we're expecting you around 6. It would be better if you brought Finn. I think she'd like to finally meet your savior. After promising to arrive by 6, Shauna placed her phone on the nightstand and returned to the kitchen. Her expression must have been very telling because Finn looked concerned. Who called? Stacy, Shauna replied, sitting down. Does Lainey already know? Yes, and she wants to see me at 6. Who is the person who was caught? Shauna asked. Her name is Tara Rader. But that name means nothing to me, Shauna mused. Maybe not, but you were in the same orphanage. Although she often left to live with families, she never stayed anywhere for long. You mean we were in the orphanage together? But I don't remember any Tara. Even if we did know each other, why would she do something like this? Is she holding a grudge against us? Shauna asked. Finn shrugged. I have no idea. Only the investigator knows the details, and he's not very talkative. The only thing we found out is who she is. As for her motives are something Lainey needs to explain, concluded Shauna. Finn nodded in agreement. Do you mind if I go with you to see Lainey? I was actually going to ask you to come, Shauna admitted. Finn stretched and looked at his watch. We still have plenty of time, so how about we take a walk? Finish your tea, and let's go. Half an hour later, they stepped outside and walked slowly, discussing seemingly insignificant things. However, after a while, Shauna started to feel relieved. Finn was an excellent listener. Time flew by unnoticed. Around 6 o'clock, they returned, got in the car, and headed to Scott's. Stacy met them at the door. Giving Finn an appraising look, she smiled. "It's good you're together. Lainey has been up for a while and seems to be feeling much better. Maybe we shouldn't bring up what happened?" Shauna asked. "Oh no, she won't rest until she tells you everything." Stacy shook her head. "You two chat for a bit, and I'll go make dinner." "Shauna!" Lainey exclaimed, coming into the hallway. Dressed in a colorful house dress, she brushed off some invisible dust and then smiled. "Hello, Finn. I'm so glad you came. Good evening. Come in, both of you." Scott went to the store for groceries and should be back soon. Fiddling with a handkerchief, she glanced anxiously at Shauna, repeatedly averting her eyes. Lainey's tear-streaked face immediately told Shauna that the woman was deeply upset and had been crying when left alone. Leading the guests to the living room, Lainey sank into a soft chair and was silent for a few minutes, gathering her thoughts. When the pause became too long, she finally spoke. "Stacy probably told you that Scott and I went to see the investigator. I really don't want to tell you the truth, but sooner or later, you'll find out anyway. So, it's better to hear it from me than from strangers." She sighed and then added, "I don't know if you remember a girl named Tara?" "No," Shauna shook her head. "I thought so. She was from our orphanage, just 5 years older than you." Lainey fell silent, then took an envelope from a book on the table and handed it to Shauna. Inside was a photo that made Shauna gasp as soon as she saw it. "That's the woman," she murmured, trying to stay calm. "Finn, this is the stranger with the scar on her face that I saw near my house and here too. I thought she was following me." Finn took the photo and scrutinized the face of the stranger. A brunette, slightly older than Shauna, with dull gray eyes, pale skin, and slightly prominent cheekbones, she could have been very attractive if it weren't for the large scar on her right cheek. The woman looked tired and worn out, as if she hadn't slept for days. "That's Tara," Lainey explained, "the girl who sneaked into our yard at night." "But why?" Shauna didn't understand. "What did we do to her? I never told you this story. It's not something to be proud of. And blaming Tara isn't fair either. If Shauna hadn't woken up in time, Tara would have been accused of more than just arson," Finn said. "How could she have done such a thing?" Lainey smiled sadly. "You know, I need to start from the beginning, otherwise, it will be hard for you to understand how it all happened." That year, Lainey and her husband Len had just moved from a small town to the city. Changing jobs, buying a house, and settling in were challenging but necessary tasks. They already had 3 wonderful boys growing up, whom Lainey had long considered her own, despite all of them being adopted from orphanages. The family probably wouldn't have decided to move to the city if it weren't for the lack of specialists the boys needed. They all required help that could only be found in the city. For the sake of the children, Lainey and her husband made a drastic change. They put their beloved spacious apartment in the house, inherited by Len, up for sale and then waited. A few months later, Lainey and Len were unpacking in their new place. The spacious 3-room house with a small garden was even better than their previous apartment. Though it was located on the outskirts of the city and quite old, Lainey knew they couldn't have found anything better. After enrolling the boys in the local school, the couple immediately started their new jobs. Lainey began working at the orphanage nearby. Despite Len's attempts to dissuade her, she was determined to continue working with children, even feeling a burning desire to help someone else. Soon, she got the chance. A girl caught her eye. Dark-haired, with gray eyes that seemed to change color with her mood. She was the most difficult child Lainey had ever encountered and, probably, the most miserable. Tara. That was her name. A short 9-year-old girl, Tara had been moved from one family to another, never staying anywhere for long. She had a tough childhood. Her parents were more concerned with the contents of their glasses, enduring sleepless nights and showing complete indifference to their surroundings. Tara didn't even know what kindergarten was. One day, police officers came to her house, ignored her parents' protests, helped the girl pack, and took her away. Life in the orphanage wasn't easy. Tara was scolded for being unkempt, reprimanded for not listening, and wasn't liked there either. However, it wasn't long before a woman appeared on the horizon, eager to become her mother. The first, the second. They all wanted to transform the unruly girl into a model, and most importantly, a happy daughter. But in the end, they all brought her back. When Lainey met Tara, she immediately decided to take her in. She longed for a daughter so much and wanted to help her so badly that she didn't listen to her husband. However, this time, Len stood firm. After a weekend that Tara spent at their home, he called his wife to the kitchen, closed the door behind him so the kids wouldn't hear, and said, "We can't take her." "Why not?" Lainey asked. "Don't you see?" Her husband squinted, "My own health is more important. If she's this unruly now, what will happen once we finalize the paperwork?" Anthony was difficult at first too, Lainey whispered. He was. But not like this. "I think I understand why she's been returned several times. Tara will not be staying here. And that's final." No matter how Lainey tried to convince her husband, Len remained adamant. After thinking it over, she realized that they indeed couldn't handle Tara. The girl listened to no one, did everything out of spite, and then smiled smugly as she watched others get upset. All the orphanage workers complained about her behavior, so Lainey abandoned her idea. Tara was furious. She probably would have done something to get back at Lainey if wealthy people hadn't appeared out of nowhere. They showered the girl with expensive gifts and, ignoring the records of her past, started gathering the necessary documents. Lainey resigned herself and hoped that Tara had finally found her family. 2 years later, Lainey's family grew. First, Dave, who was 13 at the time, joined them, and then Scott. However, Lainey's desire for a daughter didn't fade. She grew fond of Shauna and even tried to persuade her to become part of their large family. But the girl refused. Then Lainey learned that Tara had been rejected once again. Lainey fell silent and looked intently at the bewildered Shauna. "I don't know what happened with them, but Tara ended up in the hospital. She got that scar on her cheek, and those who were going to adopt her lost their parental rights," Lainey said quietly. "I really wanted to help her, and I even went to see her in the hospital, but she didn't want to see me. Eventually, she was placed in an orphanage in another city. The investigator said that after a few years of wandering, she decided to return to where she spent her childhood, remembered me, and wanted to find me to talk." Lainey averted her eyes and fell silent. Clutching her handkerchief tightly, she continued. "When she came to my house, she saw you, Shauna. She found out from the neighbors who you were and what you were doing there, and she was shocked. Tara confessed to the investigator that she still doesn't know what came over her. She followed us for several days, not daring to approach. Then she overheard a conversation in the gazebo. Do you remember when we were drinking tea and talking about the past, and I said that you were like a daughter to me?" Lainey paused again, tears streaming down her face. "And Tara decided to get revenge. On you and me. But you did nothing wrong," Shauna exclaimed. "I didn't take her into our family. I gave her hope. She knew that after she was taken away, we adopted 2 more boys. But she didn't know that I also wanted you," Lainey explained. "It makes sense that you don't remember her," Finn said, "You're 5 years apart. What's going on here?" Scott asked as he entered the room. "Mom, are you crying again?" No, Lainey shook her head, quickly dabbing her tears with the handkerchief. "But I told you. Mom, your blood pressure is high. The doctor asked you to avoid stress and especially tears," he said, looking at his mother reproachfully. "I know," she sighed, I had to tell you about Tara. I don't want to hear about that crazy girl, he said. She's not crazy, she's just an unhappy girl with a complicated life who got lost and made a mistake, Lainey insisted. Mom, you have 5 sons with complicated lives, but none of us drove our parents to the brink or set houses on fire. And Shauna, she grew up in an orphanage. Should she now go out and take it out on those who left her or didn't take her in? Scott argued, she even visited her mother, and nothing happened. In the room, silence fell. Shauna looked at Scott, ready to disappear into the ground. He already regretted letting slip, but it was too late. Shauna, murmured Lainey. Why did you go to your mother? Why does Scott know and I don't? Oh, Stacy, Shauna muttered under her breath, then looked at Lainey. Yes, I was with her. But you promised to let me know if you were going. I didn't tell you everything. Honestly, I was hoping you wouldn't go through with it. Now, I suppose you know everything already, right? Shauna nodded. Lainey, let's drop this conversation. I don't have a mother named Raiden, and I never did. You're my mom. Shauna worried about Lainey's health. She was getting older and had health problems that couldn't handle stress. So, Shauna didn't want to ask her anything anymore. All she really wanted was to change the subject as soon as possible and forget about the visit to Raiden. Dropping her handkerchief, Lainey smiled and then covered her face with her hands. It was unclear if she was crying or laughing, but Scott rolled his eyes and hurried to his mother. It's okay, my darlings, Lainey sniffled. I know you worry about me, but you don't need to. Everything's fine now, really. Let's help Stacy in the kitchen instead. We'll help, and you'll sit nearby, have some tea, Scott said. Whatever you say, son, his mother smiled and hugged him as she got up. Walking down the corridor toward the kitchen, Lainey deliberately lingered and whispered to Shauna. Scott's always like that when he's worried. He just loves you very much, the girl smiled. I know. Just how do I stay calm? Tara's fate will be decided in court soon. It's not clear yet how it will all turn out. The investigator told me directly that Tara might escape the punishment he thinks she deserves. Lainey looked closely at Shauna, then lowered her voice so no one else would hear them. You know, I don't want to ruin her life. She made a mistake and got tangled up. It could happen to anyone. Are you serious? Exclaimed Shauna. Quiet. Scott might hear. Lainey, do you realize what would have happened if we hadn't woken up in time? Lainey looked away cautiously and nodded. I understand logically, but it's heavy on my heart. It could have gone so differently. All right, let's go to the kids, they've been waiting for us. A month had passed since then. The first morning of August was cloudy. Clouds hung over the city. Shauna left the house and glanced anxiously at the sky. Clutching an umbrella, she headed to the bus stop, eager to get to work as quickly as possible. However, someone's voice made her slow down, then stop altogether. Between the houses, she noticed Louisa, Finn's mom. Dressed in a light blue coat, she quickly tapped her heels along the path, and as she approached, Shauna caught a faint scent of expensive perfume that filled the air around them. Good morning, Shauna. Good morning. Aren't you in a hurry? The woman asked, glancing at her. I wanted to discuss something with you. All right. But I don't have much time. Then let's talk on the way. Shauna nodded in agreement and started towards the bus stop. Meeting Louisa was unexpected. Moreover, it was clear that living in another part of the city, Finn's mom was not here by chance. How have you been? Louisa asked, casting a sidelong glance at her. Finn doesn't tell me anything. But I think there's news. What are you talking about? Shauna didn't understand. Well, I mean your move to a new apartment. I don't have any apartment yet. But you're not planning to stay with Finn forever, are you? Louisa smirked. Louisa, just tell me straight, do you want me to move out? Shauna asked. Well, it's not that I want you to, hesitated Louisa, but you have to understand, Finn won't live with us forever, especially not with his girlfriend. Girlfriend? Shauna asked, seeking clarification. Oh, didn't he tell you? Oh, this is awkward, Louisa shook her head. Finn met a wonderful girl, and I hope we can get close to her in the future. Her name is Maggie. She works at our hospital as a pediatrician. Strange that he didn't mention it. I thought you knew. I understand. I'll vacate the apartment as soon as possible. Oh no, live as long as you like. I just wanted to know how things are and if you need any help. No, I don't need any. Well, as you wish, Louisa smiled, then glanced at her miniature wristwatch. Oh, I'm late for work myself. Well, goodbye, Shauna. Goodbye. Waving her hand, Louisa walked away, leaving behind a lingering scent of floral perfume. As the first large raindrops fell on the asphalt, Shauna, fearing to get wet, hurried to the bus stop. Throughout the day, she couldn't stop thinking about their morning conversation. Over the past month, Finn hadn't mentioned anyone named Maggie and acted as if Shauna was the sole focus of his life. He spent all his free time with her, met her after work, took her on city strolls, and helped her with her problems. He only visited his parents' place to spend the night, which surely didn't sit well with Louisa. Shauna tried to ensure that Finn spent as little time with her as possible. She was head over heels in love, finding it hard to bear moments when he wasn't around, futilely trying to hide her true feelings. He surrounded her with care to the point where Shauna couldn't imagine how she had lived before him. It seemed like he felt the same way. So, when Louisa mentioned the girlfriend, Shauna didn't believe her, but a sense of unease settled in her heart. She didn't want to come between mother and son and force them to argue. After lunch, Shauna checked apartment listings and chose one where she could move in as soon as tomorrow. She knew Finn would protest, but she decided to leave his apartment as soon as possible. In the evening, she returned home and started packing her things. But before she could even pack half of her belongings, Finn appeared at the doorstep. Seeing a travel bag in the middle of the room and clothes spread on the floor, he was surprised. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I found an apartment in good condition, so I can move in tomorrow," Shauna replied. Finn sat down on the couch and looked at her intently. "And you're leaving?" "We agreed otherwise." "Shauna, what happened? Just yesterday you weren't planning to go anywhere, and now suddenly you're leaving." "It's nothing, everything's fine." "I don't believe you," he muttered, frowning. "What about Tara? Any news?" "Lainey spoke with the investigator today. Tara didn't pass the evaluation, and now she's going to receive treatment. So, she wasn't herself after all." Shauna nodded and sat down on the edge of the couch. "And how did Lainey take it?" "Well, on one hand, she's upset, but on the other hand, I think she's glad that this girl will get help now. As far as I know, her illness didn't just appear yesterday. It's been with her since childhood. Probably inherited from her mother, and treatment might not change much. At least she's under supervision now." Silence filled the room. Finn stared into space as if deep in thought, then abruptly turned and asked. "Don't leave. I don't know what happened. Maybe I behaved wrongly. But, stay. Someday I'll have to move anyway," Shauna said, feeling her cheeks flush. "If you have to, I'll go with you. Is there another empty room in that apartment? I'll be your neighbor. Do you think they'll be okay with me staying?" "So, that's why you're packing." "My family didn't behave very well when we met," he sighed. "When I agreed to move in with them to make living together more fun, I never expected what awaited me. My mom has never watched over me like this. I didn't want to tell you, but sometimes I get the impression that my mom is jealous of my relationships. And you're no exception. So, it's not about me." "No, a couple of years ago, I had a relationship with someone who was just perfect by my mom's standards. But it didn't end well. We broke up because of my parents' dislike, even though I tried to mend things between them. Maybe I shouldn't have moved in with my parents. They interfere too much in my life." He fell silent and then suddenly asked, "So, will you stay?" "I don't know. I don't want you and your mom to argue, Finn. You know, I have an idea to make everyone happy," he said mysteriously and smiled. "What idea?" Shauna asked. "I'll tell you about everything in a couple of days. Just promise not to go anywhere." "Okay. I just don't quite understand what you've come up with." "It's nothing to worry about," he smiled reassuringly. Finn glanced at the clock and sighed heavily. It was starting to get dark outside, and it was time to head home, but apparently, he wasn't eager to do so. Perhaps it was because Louisa had been pestering him with constant questions, or maybe there was something else Shauna didn't know about. His gaze wandered around the room, his face looking somewhat weary. Shauna stayed silent for a few seconds, then unexpectedly asked. "Stay." "What?" Finn replied. "Stay here. If you want to, and if it's convenient for you to get to work in the morning," she said. "You shouldn't drive in this state." Emotions swung between warmth and cold, and the room fell silent, as if time had frozen. Finn looked at her with surprise, then grinned broadly. "I didn't think you'd suggest I stay. I remember someone was afraid to let me into the apartment when we first met. And now I'm not. Well then, I'm obligated to stay and cook you something good." "You're planning to cook?" "Why not? Sometimes I think you survive on air alone." Shauna blushed, and he chuckled heartily. "Just kidding. Humor is essential in my line of work, so get used to it. I should take you to my unit sometime, especially since you've already met some of the guys. It'll definitely never be boring. Let me text my parents so they won't worry, and then we can figure out what to cook." After sending a message to his mother, Finn muted his phone and hurried to the kitchen. Despite mainly living with his parents, he turned out to be quite a capable cook. Cooking with Finn turned out to be very engaging. During the time he stood at the stove, Shauna heard dozens of funny stories and amusing anecdotes. They both looked completely happy, and as a result, they lost track of time. When they returned to the room later, Finn picked up his phone and frowned. He didn't say anything, but Shauna sensed that his change in mood was due to his mother. The next morning, Shauna opened her eyes and looked out the window where it was still dark. She wished this moment would never end. Finn was asleep, his nose lightly sniffling into the pillow. His dark hair was tousled, and the corners of his lips were slightly upturned, as if he were smiling in his sleep. The alarm would ring soon, and everything would return to its usual routine. Shauna gently ran her fingertips along Finn's back and smiled. Suddenly, she remembered that his face seemed very familiar to her. Yet, during all this time, Shauna couldn't figure out where they might have met before. Even now, looking at his gentle smile, she felt like she knew it. Where had she seen it before? "Time to get up already," he murmured, stretching. "No, it's too early to wake up," she replied. Finn abruptly opened his eyes, mischief twinkling in them. Without saying another word, he pulled her closer, sending a pleasant warmth through her entire body and causing shivers down her spine. "I don't want to go to work," he whispered. "But what about the people? Who will save them? Just knowing I saved you is enough." Laughing, Shauna tried to wriggle free. "That tickles. Well, in that case, I have no choice but to go to work. Otherwise, I won't get out from under the covers until tomorrow." "You're definitely not going anywhere, right?" Shauna looked at him in surprise and pulled the blanket up to her chin. "I mean your promise from yesterday," he reminded her. "No, except for work, but I promise to be back by evening." "Well, then I can go to work without worry." He reached for his mobile phone lying on the chair beside the bed and checked his messages, pursing his lips. "Your mom?" Shauna asked quietly. "Yeah. She first asked me to come over nicely, then I guess got upset and started demanding more forcefully. We need to sort this out as soon as possible. I can imagine what was going on there yesterday." He threw off the blanket and went to wash up, leaving Shauna pensively watching him. It felt like none of this was happening to her or was even real, and she was afraid to wake up from it. The next 2 days felt more like a fairy tale than real life to Shauna. She had never felt so uplifted. All her problems faded into the background and ceased to bother her, her thoughts were consumed only by Finn. Even Lainey, hearing her voice over the phone, immediately sensed that something very pleasant had happened in her life. Shauna spilled all the details, and Lainey was overjoyed. Just be careful with his parents, she cautioned. No matter what kind of people they are, good or bad, they're still his family. Don't ruin your relationship with them. And ask Finn to call home occasionally. They worry. By the way, I have some news too, you won't believe it. Though you probably already know. What are you talking about? Shauna asked, surprised. Last night, all my boys got together and brought me to see some gift. I thought maybe we were going shopping. But no, we pulled up to a house. Almost identical to mine. And they said, Mom, this is all yours now. I nearly fainted. They bought me a house. I scolded them so much. And they're laughing. Did you like it? Of course. So many trees, flowers. Such beauty around, the forest, fresh air, quiet. Tell me honestly, did you know? Yes, Shauna replied. Scott probably thought of it. Shauna struggled not to burst out laughing. Besides him, there's no one else, Lainey continued. Since childhood, he's been a generator of ideas. Well, tomorrow we're moving. They've already done some minimal repairs and bought furniture. So, I'm expecting you and Finn to visit. We'll definitely come, Shauna promised. After talking with Lainey for another half hour, she hung up and realized she couldn't stop smiling. Despite always regretting not having children of her own, Lainey could truly be considered a happy woman now. The boys, despite all the difficulties, had grown up wonderfully, and Shauna was sure that Lainey would never feel lonely now. What more could an elderly person need? On the third day, Finn had a day off, but he spent the entire day out, citing some business. By evening, he returned to the apartment looking very pleased. Something happened? Shauna asked when he started humming to himself. You're practically glowing. I have a reason. Listen, I probably can't wait until morning, so get ready and let's go. I'll show you something. Where? Shauna was intrigued. I'll tell you everything when we get there. But I think you'll like it. Unable to extract more details, Shauna went to get ready. It was pleasantly warm and summery outside. The air was filled with a unique, incomparable freshness. Getting into the car, they headed towards the city center. The car weaved through the city streets so quickly that Shauna eventually lost track and didn't understand where they were headed. She wasn't very familiar with this area. Slowing down, the car sharply turned right and entered a courtyard. Small and unassuming, the building stood surrounded by trees. Glancing at the plaque on the front of the house, Shauna asked in surprise. Where have we come? Come on, you'll understand everything soon. They entered the building, climbed to the third floor, and stopped at one of the doors. Finn pulled out his keys from his pocket and opened it. Okay, let's turn on the light now. A bulb flickered on under the ceiling. Finn walked deeper into the apartment, gesturing for Shauna to follow. The place was deserted, with no curtains on the windows and no personal belongings anywhere. It felt like no one had lived here in a long time. The large room was furnished with fairly simple furniture, as was the kitchen. Finn paced around the room, following Shauna, and grinned happily. So, what do you think? I'm not quite understanding whose apartment this is. It's ours now. It's rented, of course, but it's ours. Shauna froze, unsure how to react to such news. But you already have an apartment, she muttered, looking around. I do. But it's not really mine. The apartment belongs to my parents as inheritance from my grandmother. I didn't feel like I could truly call it my own, especially because it belongs to my mom. So, I couldn't feel like the master there as much as I wanted to," he explained. "Actually, I've been saving up for my own place in secret from my parents for a while now, hoping to buy one in the next couple of years. But now I realize that can't go on like this." "So, did you rent this place for us?" "Yes. But I'll be paying the rent myself." "That's non-negotiable. If you want, I could live somewhere else, and you could stay here. But I'll still be covering the rent." "No," Shauna said. "So, together?" "Yes, together." Finn moved closer and gently brushed his hand against her cheek. "I somehow knew you'd agree. Cooking is my part, and creating coziness will be yours." "Alright, then tomorrow I'll pick out the curtains," she said. Moving into a rental apartment became a real challenge for Finn. As soon as Louisa learned about her son's intentions, they had a serious conversation. Of course, Finn didn't share all the details with Shauna, but judging by his distressed look after returning from his mother's, she guessed that the conversation probably had been heated, and Louisa wasn't happy with Finn's decision. On Saturday morning, as they were getting ready to visit Lainey's new home to congratulate her, there was a ring at the doorbell. "Are you expecting someone?" Shauna asked, standing by the mirror with lipstick in her hand. "No, maybe it's the neighbors," Finn shrugged. "I'll go check." A few seconds later, the lock clicked in the hallway, followed by a familiar male voice. Shauna set aside the lipstick and hurried to the door. To her surprise, it was Martin, Finn's father. He looked weary. Meeting Shauna's puzzled gaze, Martin smiled faintly. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Yes, we need to talk, son." "With Mom?" No, Martin shook his head. "Your mom is at work and doesn't know I'm here. Though I hope she won't find out." He glanced at his son with a pleading look, and upon receiving affirmation, walked into the room. Settling on the couch, Martin looked around. Cozy little apartment. "I'm glad you gave me this address." "What's the matter?" Finn asked quickly. Martin glanced at Shauna, then spoke unexpectedly. "You know your mother is against your moving out. She wants you to come back home and even asked me to persuade you. But from my perspective, you've done the right thing. After all, how long can this go on? She just doesn't seem to understand that you and Charlotte have long outgrown the need for parental control. She believes you'd be better off at home. What do you suggest, Dad? We need to weather this. I know you worry about your mom, but trust me, she'll calm down soon. Remember the situation with Amanda. I think if back then you had stood your ground and put your mother in her place, you two wouldn't have separated." Finn sighed heavily and turned to Shauna. "Amanda was my ex-girlfriend, I've told you about her." "I understand," she replied. Martin remained silent for a few seconds, then unexpectedly said. "Shauna, forgive me if I've been too harsh or presumptuous. I've had my concerns that you might be someone who marries a man for his possessions. Amanda made me nervous back then. It's all right." "No, it's not. And I know that. Dad, why is Mom acting like this?" Finn sighed. "She's afraid of being left alone. You're leaving, and so is Charlotte," Martin said, looking carefully at his son. "And she doesn't trust Shauna, because of her past. So live peacefully. And don't even think about going back home. If you need help, you can always come to me. And we'll probably rent out Grandma's apartment, so make sure you take all the necessary things." With these words, Martin got up and extended his hand to Finn. "I should go home now. Thanks for coming, Dad. You come visit too. Your mother, I think, will settle down soon. She won't be angry at her beloved son forever. Goodbye, Shauna." "See you," the girl smiled. Martin walked into the hallway, and Finn hurried after him. They whispered to each other for a few more minutes, and when Finn returned, he looked very pleased. "What? Shauna asked, surprised. My dad said he really likes you. He even said you're a good match for me, Finn chuckled. He said that exactly. Yeah, why? Aren't you happy about it? Finn smirked. No, I'm fine with everything. It's just your mom. Well, don't worry about that. She's just going through a tough time at work. Problems. And I add to her worries. But you'll see, everything will work out. Shauna smiled. You know, Finn suddenly said, I dream about having my own house, and I already know what I want. For example, the place we're heading to now is really nice. You mean near Laney's? Yeah, a spacious house, a good plot, a garden. I like that more than concrete houses all crammed together. Finn laughed and glanced at his watch. By the way, we should be leaving soon. You'll introduce me to all of this woman's sons. I'm impressed by them, even though I've never met them. The location of Laney's house turned out to be truly remarkable. There was no city noise, no cramped yards filled with cars, no exhaust fumes stifling the air. It seemed like life flowed a bit slower and calmer there, and neighbors knew each other by name, exchanging the latest news or simply smiling when they met. Laney had already introduced to all the neighbors and even invited a couple of new friends over. She seemed to have come alive and felt like a true mistress of the house, as if she had spent the past few years there. Sitting at the lively table, Shauna looked at her sons, their wives, children, and quietly rejoiced. She suddenly realized that these people were her family, who would support and help her in difficult times. Stacy, once again, asked Shauna for forgiveness, recalling her blunder. I shouldn't have told Scott about our trip out of town. Didn't think he'd spill it to Mom. It's okay, Shauna reassured her. Did you guys talk to Laney about Raiden? No. Why would we? I've already found out everything I wanted to, and I don't want to hear any more about her, Stacy frowned. I'm sorry for bringing it up. But honestly, I still can't believe she gave up her own child so easily, Stacy frowned. Shauna shrugged and glanced at Laney, who was laughing heartily. Listen, Stacy, let's forget about their existence, all right? Stacy nodded and didn't return to the topic. After visiting Laney until evening, Shauna said goodbye to everyone and opened the car door, sinking tiredly into the seat. One more slice of cake, and I would have burst, she sighed. I like how well you eat as a guest, Finn grinned. If only you were like that at home. At home, we'll have to finish off the cake and salads, Shauna reminded him. Laney didn't let me leave until I took a couple of containers with me. Well, then we'll keep feeding you, Finn teased. Shauna squinted and then laughed. But we did have a good time, Finn remarked. How do you like the house? By the way, I wasn't kidding about what I said about a house there. I like your idea. Well, then it's settled. Shauna widened her eyes and asked. Settled? Just thinking out loud, don't mind me. By the way, while you were checking out the garden, I managed to talk to my mom. She called herself. No, we agreed to meet in a few days at a small restaurant near her house and talk. And I really hope you'll come with me. Are you sure that's a good idea? Shauna asked, growing slightly pale. Good. We all need to talk. Sooner rather than later. The young man smiled and started the engine. Shauna observed his determined expression and pondered what the outcome of this meeting might be for them. Truth be told, she didn't expect to see Louisa anytime soon. Hence, she was nervous. Shauna wanted to make a good impression on his parents and someday become part of their small family, if possible. But while things with Martin were somewhat clear, it seemed Louisa didn't want her son to become independent and live with a girl who had spent her entire childhood in an orphanage. Shauna dreamed of radically changing her life. After working for several months in the cafeteria, she realized that being a chef was not her calling. Cooking just didn't work out for her, despite her efforts to follow recipes precisely. She hadn't dared to tell Laney about this. Deep down, she hoped to leave her hated job soon and pursue something she truly loved. The meeting with Louisa was scheduled for Tuesday. Meanwhile, Shauna couldn't sit still. Firstly, she had never been to restaurants and had no idea how to behave in such places. Secondly, she was trembling with fear of Finn's mother, remembering how their first meeting had gone. However, she had no choice. The small restaurant, located on a quiet narrow street where Shauna had never been before, amazed her. Inside, it was so unusual that upon entering, she froze in place, unable to move. Majestic, snow-white columns adorned with molding lined the walls. Unusual plants hung from the ceiling, veiling a figurative lattice. The walls were adorned with seascapes, and the tables were covered with pristine white tablecloths, set with fine china and an incredible number of silverware. As she sat down at the table, Shauna already regretted agreeing to come. She felt very uncomfortable here, as if everyone was staring at her, surprised by her presence in such an expensive establishment. Louisa arrived a few minutes later, dressed in flowing turquoise dress. She nodded silently to those gathered and sat down. "I really hope our meeting won't drag on," she quickly said, looking at Finn. "Whatever you say, Mom," he smiled. "Let's start with ordering, and then we can talk. I don't understand what this could be about. You ran away from home, abandoned your apartment, and now you're living who knows where," Louisa continued bluntly. "Mom, let's not argue," Finn interjected. Louisa cast a hostile glance at Shauna and asked, "I assume you two are planning to get married? If only your grandmother could see this." "We are," Finn stated calmly. "But Louisa began quickly and then stopped herself. "Shauna is a very good girl, Mom. I love her. And if you can't accept that, I'm sorry. But both of you mean the world to me, so I want us to be able to communicate normally." Shauna looked at Finn in disbelief, but he kept going. "Remember how you yourself talked about how Grandma reacted to your relationship with Dad? Didn't she think you were a bad match back then? And even forbade you from seeing each other? What does that have to do with anything? That was a completely different situation. I came from a good family, and Shauna." Finn frowned, and Louisa, clearly wanting to make another cutting remark, immediately stopped herself. "I'm sorry that you judge a person solely based on their past. After all, you don't really know her. Maybe that's the truth. Coming here was probably a bad idea." "No," Louisa sighed. "Not a bad one. I just want you to be happy, son. Don't you understand that?" "I do, Mom, I do," Finn said, taking her hand. "I thought the teenage years were the hardest, and after that I wouldn't have to worry about you anymore. But both you and Charlotte have decided to give me an emotional shake-up worse than being in the hospital. Do you know what your sister announced?" "What is it?" Finn asked. "She's getting married. Now that's news." Finn whistled. The woman nodded, then looked thoughtfully at Shauna and said, "I guess we should order. I have a feeling we'll be here for a while." Returning home, Shauna remained silent for a long time, watching the passing cars and reflecting on the recent meeting. Despite Louisa's attempts to appear polite, it seemed she still opposed Finn's new relationship. This meant any chance of a friendly connection was out of the question. The situation seemed hopeless, and Shauna didn't know what could be done about it. It was impossible to please Finn's mother, she thought. When the car stopped near their home, Finn turned to her and asked, "What are you thinking about? You said the restaurant we were heading to would be small." "I'm still impressed," she replied. "Most importantly, you liked it. Do you know what I always think about?" Finn continued. Shauna looked up at him. "I always think that if it weren't for that fire, we might have never met," he said. "Well, then I guess Tara helped us," Shauna said, feeling herself blush. "Exactly. By the way, how is she doing?" "Well, she's still in treatment, and it looks like she'll be there for a few more years." Lainey even got excited about the idea of moving something for her, but Scott vetoed that. That Scott is just a tyrant, Finn remarked. Shauna struggled not to laugh. What if I'm like that too? Finn asked. I don't think so. Well, look, you'll have to put up with me for the rest of your life, he teased. For the rest of my life? Yeah, if you don't mind. I don't mind. Shauna looked away to hide the tears welling up slowly. A lump formed in her throat, and breathing became difficult. She couldn't believe her happiness and feared ruining everything. She liked him so much that she wanted to tell him right now, but she hesitated. So, to change the subject quickly, she asked. Do you think I could be a good teacher? Finn raised his eyebrows in surprise. Are you thinking of changing jobs? I've always dreamed of working with children, Shauna admitted. Well, if you really want to, I'm all for it. Do you think I could do it? Finn smiled and waved his hand. There's a daycare behind the neighboring house, and I saw an ad that they need an assistant. Go for an interview tomorrow morning, and then we can figure out something about schooling. You have to fight for your dream. If I had become a doctor like my parents wanted, I'd be miserable, serving my time like a punishment. The next morning, overcoming her fear, Shauna called the nearby daycare and was sitting in the director's office within an hour. A plump woman with dark, almost black eyes looked at her with undisguised curiosity. So, are you okay with the working conditions? Yes, Shauna nodded. In that case, we look forward to having you. Zoe from the office across will tell you all the details. Great, Shauna smiled. We have a wonderful, friendly team here, so you shouldn't have any problems fitting in. Half an hour later, Shauna dashed out onto the porch of the daycare center with a firm intention to change her life as soon as possible. She didn't know if she would succeed or handle such a challenging job, but she was eager to try. Right after the interview, Shauna hurried back to her current job. Her boss didn't take her desire to quit well. Nevertheless, he eventually let her go, handed her a clean sheet of paper, and told her to write a resignation letter. Things went smoothly at the daycare. Zoe, a pleasant and very sociable woman, greeted Shauna warmly and, after sorting out the necessary formalities, gave her a tour. Then she introduced her to Karen, the head teacher of the junior group, who desperately needed an assistant. Meet Shauna, Zoe smiled, and this is our best teacher, Karen. Karen, a fair-haired woman with a short haircut and a slightly tired expression that hinted at her being just over 40, nodded. Nice to meet you, Shauna. Let's go to the class, the kids are just sitting down. Karen left a mixed impression at first. She seemed emotionally distant and somewhat reserved to Shauna. However, once the classroom door closed, Karen seemed to come alive, and Shauna saw someone who truly belonged here and loved children. Shauna thought back to Lainey, deciding she was incredibly fortunate. The job turned out to be genuinely challenging. Shauna came home tired every day. Despite the difficulties, she felt truly needed and happy for the first time. Communicating with the children was easy and enjoyable, and her relationships with colleagues were developing well. Finn immediately noticed the changes in her behavior and started looking for a college where Shauna could study to become a teacher. When Lainey heard the latest news, she was astonished. Instead of trying to persuade Shauna to return to her old job, as Shauna had feared, Lainey supported her. A year passed. On a sunny but rather cool September morning, Shauna stood by the window overlooking the small playground in front of the daycare, watching the children and their parents rushing towards the porch. The clock already showed 8, which meant that in a few minutes, the classroom would come alive with children's voices, noise, and laughter. Shauna went for the toys. Walking down the stairs, she greeted the parents and smiled at the kids. Gone was the shy girl who used to hide from others' gazes. Over the past year, Shauna had changed a lot, for the better, as Lainey had noticed. Throughout the past year, she juggled work and preparation for her future enrollment. Now she knew exactly what she wanted. It had been 2 weeks since Shauna finally became a student at the local college, and she was increasingly enjoying life in her new status. Life was changing so rapidly for Shauna that she barely had time to grasp the sequence of events. Finn bought a house with a large garden and a view of the forest. He had kept his plans secret until he had saved enough money and found the right place. Lainey was delighted to learn they were buying a house next to hers. In July, the event Shauna eagerly awaited with trepidation finally arrived, her wedding with Finn. It was a small affair. Shauna didn't want to spend exorbitant sums on a dress, banquet hall rental, or an expensive photographer. Despite Finn's attempts to persuade her otherwise, she was determined to celebrate the occasion modestly at home. The only things Shauna and Finn chose meticulously and spared no expense on were their wedding rings. Louisa attended the celebration with a sad expression. She never quite accepted her son marrying a girl from an orphanage, and she cried through the entire ceremony. Afterwards, with tear-stained eyes, she hugged her son, wishing him happiness. "Mom, please don't cry," Finn pleaded. "How can I not?" the woman sobbed. "Charlotte got married, now you're married. What am I supposed to do now? I got married, but I didn't move to the other end of the world. Do you think I've stopped loving you and Dad?" "No, of course not," his mother shook her head. "It's just, okay. Today's your day, and I promise to pull myself together." Finn smiled. Louisa wanted to frown but forced a smile and approached Shauna. "I wish you happiness, Shauna. Thank you so much. By the way, I heard you met with your mother," Louisa murmured. "Yes, but that was a long time ago, last year," the girl quickly replied. "Why isn't she here today then?" Shauna widened her eyes slightly and answered softly. "Because I don't consider her a close person." I see. Well, I'll go to Martin, he can't seem to part with his glass." Louisa cast a cold glance at Shauna and hurried over to her husband. "Everything okay?" Finn clarified, stepping closer. "You look a bit pale. Maybe we should go outside?" No, I'm fine." "Everything's okay," Shauna reassured him. "Is Mom bringing up old issues again?" "No," Shauna shook her head. "She just congratulated me, that's all." "In that case, can I kiss my wife?" Finn asked. "Of course." In her husband's embrace, Shauna suddenly remembered her mother's expression when they bumped into each other on the street a month ago. Shauna didn't even recognize the woman standing right in front of her at first. When she realized it was Raiden, she felt an inexplicable fear. "I didn't even recognize you," Raiden said, nodding towards the children standing nearby. "We just went out for groceries." "Hello," Shauna greeted dryly. "I see you're not happy to see me. And should I be?" Raiden shrugged and looked thoughtfully at her once dear daughter. "Well, I'm in a hurry, lots to do. Just noticed you, so I thought I'd say hello." "Next time you notice me, don't bother," Shauna replied, turning away and walking off. She didn't want to see that woman. She didn't want to know her, let alone engage in polite conversation. Shauna almost ran, and only when she was far enough away did she slow down. Unexpectedly, against her own will, she recalled a vivid image from her childhood. In her mind appeared the image of a man with dark brown eyes and a smile radiating such incredible warmth that she wanted to gaze at it forever. That was her father. At least, that's how she imagined him in her dreams, although she had never seen the face of this person in reality. Remembering this, Shauna burst into tears. Suddenly, she understood where she had seen Finn's smile and why he had seemed so familiar and dear to her from the first day. All of this was in that same dream that had kept her spirits up and helped her keep going while living in the orphanage. How could she have forgotten about it? "Shauna, what are you thinking about?" Finn asked, bringing her back from her memories. "About you." "And what are you thinking about me?" he whispered. "I'm thinking that our meeting wasn't a coincidence at all, and I love you very much," Shauna quietly replied, closing her eyes, trying not to